iCare Advisors, Bob, Eric, thank you for coming and doing this talk on what iCare Advisors is, starting cold, iCare in general, optometry. We've got a crowd for those who are watching from the video, but we're going to answer questions. We'll go into it. We'll have a lot of fun.
So first of all, thanks for having us, Matt. We love what New Grad and Covalent's doing, and certainly think that you help position young grads and young ODs and practitioners for success. As you mentioned, we focus mainly on cold start practices. We typically work from day one in terms of scouting locations, trying to figure out where the optimal location for success is going to be. From there, we work through letters of intent, lease negotiation, help design the space, help determine what insurance panels to be on, and then work on lasting profitability in terms of determining the best access to cost of goods sold, making sure that practices are starting lean so that they're not overspending in the beginning, and making it next to impossible to get out of the gates by overspending from day one.
What do you feel like, an average new graduate comes out of school, or even an optometry student, and I think most people in their head, they want to open cold, and then life just catches up, and it becomes extremely difficult. So I think you got a cohort of people, and some are really interested in doing it. Do they have the power to do it? Is it easier than maybe what it seems like? What is that like?
I think, go ahead.
I think one thing everyone should take out of this talk is that it absolutely can be done. And so I think all of us, being in a younger generation, think that cold starting wasn't possible because we all have an incredible amount of student loan debt, and we don't think a bank is going to look at us. It's very difficult. When you're a student, you're used to not having any money. You're used to eating macaroni and cheese and peanut butter sandwiches, and so when you get out and you all of a sudden have a high corporate salary, it's very difficult to get away from that. So it's sometimes easier to transition with associating and also doing a practice on your own when you're already used to being able to kind of living lean. So
one of the biggest misconceptions is that you don't need to have, most of these projects, if not all, are 100% financed by banks that work directly with optometrists. So they're not asking for a down payment. They're not asking you to pay for 20%, like you may in a mortgage. They're literally financing the entire project, which not only includes your leasehold improvements and your build-outs, but operating expenses as well as cash flow when you start. So I think that's the biggest thing that traditionally maybe is considered to be the biggest barrier to cold starting. And thanks to favorable lending by a number of institutions, that's been erased, which is great.
Got it. So I think, for me, an optometrist, I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who wants to open cold, and sure, there's a few things I need to start, right? I need the building, I need the space, I need the exam room. What about the mindset? How do I learn? What's a P&L statement? How do I budget this? How do you knock down those barriers? Because I know it's a lot easier than it may seem when you're thinking, oh, I need an MBA to do this. You don't. So speak on that.
Well, as you mentioned, you do need a location, you need financing, you need all those things, but the number one thing you need, hands down, is the motivation to succeed. And Bob and I talk over and over again, we're here to help facilitate the process and to position you for success, but ultimately success is going to be up to you, and you're going to be the one that carries it forward. And the best way to do that is to understand it's not easy. It definitely isn't. Even with us, it's still not easy. You have to put in the time. It's going to be what consumes you. And once you start the process and you sign that lease, it's a pretty time-limited process in the sense that you're incentivized to get the doors open as quick as you possibly can. And so it's not something where you can sort of haphazardly jump into it, but we always recommend doing it from the very beginning when you have that motivation, because as you mentioned, life gets in the way as you get going. Once it becomes a part of your focus and what you're doing, it becomes very easy. They always say it doesn't feel like work when you're doing it for yourself. It couldn't be more true. I mean, once every ounce of equity, sweat equity, becomes your actual equity, it becomes much easier to do.
Yeah.
Just to comment on that as well is, I like to always say that the secret is that there is no secret. I mean, it's a lot of hard work, but we're here to help you get over those mental hurdles of, wow, I don't have an MBA, I don't have a business background, but that's what we're here for. We have made a lot of these mistakes early on. We've seen people make them. Now we are able to take all this information and get it perfect from the start so you can hit the ground running. We go ahead and develop your business plan for you based on your demographic and what you want to provide and based on your mission statement. Always start with a great mission statement. You always have to define what exactly you want to do. And once you wrap your brain around what you want to do, we can build everything we want to do from there.
The big concern is typically the magnitude of student loans, feeling like at any moment you could kind of fall off the rails if you make a poor choice. But the reality is, That's why our focus is on starting lean, so that it is a completely controlled environment, if you will. If you overspend from the beginning, if you open the doors day one with an OCT, you're going to be in a position where if those patients don't show up, you're going to be in trouble. We like to build from a foundational point to where you can grow slowly. You can afford to be there. Maybe you only see patients 2 days a week in the beginning and you have supplemental income. So we focus heavily on associating income or supplemental income because that's guaranteed. So you build your lifestyle around that, you build your budget around that, you include your student loan payment in that, so that number never changes no matter what happens to your practice, and you open with enough cash flow for the practice that you're going to be sustainable for long enough that as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and focusing your efforts on that as well, you'll grow accordingly. You'll go from 2 days to 3 days, and you'll drop a day of supplemental because now you can make up the difference. Then you go to 4, and then eventually you get to the point where you're full-fledged into your practice, but not before the profits are sustaining you, so that you're not ever having to worry about that student loan.
Yeah. So what does it look like? The new customer comes on board. Someone's working in a full-time position and they're ready to take time off to begin this new venture, right? What does the early days look like? What does the first 6 months or 12 months look like of a new opening cold practice in a typical average sense? What kind of equipment do you have? What are some of the hurdles? What's the education process like?
So we like to start as early as possible. As Eric was saying earlier, again, our focus is on starting lean, so we won't allow you to overspend. So we really love hybrid pieces of equipment. The great thing about our profession is a lot of the equipment hasn't changed in about 100 years. So the chair and the stand looks very similar to what our grandfathers went to go see an optometrist back in the day. The phoropter looks very similar. The slit lamp is very similar. So we can do a lot of these pieces of equipment that are refurbished, and they make you the same amount of money as a brand new piece of diagnostic equipment does. And so we focus a lot on sourcing our pieces of equipment from different vendors all over the country to be able to secure the best price. We also believe in a lot of anterior segment imaging, where you can also do a posterior segment image at the same time. So you can bill both posterior seg, you do a glaucoma workup, and you also can run the anterior segment live, which is really impressive to the patient because they know what their iris looks like. And so we like to do a wow technology factor with real simple handheld pieces of equipment without spending $60,000 on a piece of diagnostic equipment where you're only able to bill a couple times a month.
Got it.
So.
And as far as the timeline on the front end, sort of what you're going to be doing in the early stages, of course, location's a big factor. It's one of the key factors to success. And typically, what we do is we'll work in conjunction with a broker who is helping scout what's available in a certain area. We then go through and run a geospatial analysis on the majority of those locations to determine what's going to be best suited for optometry. And then from there, you enter into what's called a letter of intent, where you're basically laying out the sort of key factors of a lease, which are pretty much anything that involves a number you agree upon in principle on the front end, and then you get into the core lease after the fact. Simultaneously, you're working on building your business, so you're forming an entity, you're becoming an LLC in most cases, and then all the while you're starting to work on what your functional business plan is going to be, as Bob mentioned, from an equipment standpoint, from a frame standpoint, making sure that everything sort of happens simultaneously. On the flip side, as you guys kind of mentioned earlier, the overwhelming element of the global view. We really only give a client the global view in the very beginning, and we basically say you're never going to look at this again. So we kind of give them an outline of the entire process, and then we walk them through step by step the rest of the way so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. And 6 months later, they realize they've accomplished all 24 items, but it didn't feel like it. Whereas if you're constantly looking at the global view, you're almost paralyzed with indecision because you don't even know where to start. There's so many things that you think you have to do at once. And there really is a logical stepwise fashion to go through the steps of opening cold.
Yeah.
We always recommend that when you are starting cold, that you need to be associating at another practice at the same time. In fact, most of the banks that are preferred lenders of ours, they require it. So they need to have some type of supplemental income on the outside. We also think it's valuable too because you get to learn a lot of lessons about what you might want to do in your practice or maybe what you don't want to do. So you can kind of look at some of the operations on the other practice that you happen to be working at and maybe take some things from there that you can use in your own practice. You're also able to make connections now. So I encourage everybody that's associating right now or maybe even teching at a practice to build relationships, Facebook friend them. You never know who's going to work at your practice down the road. It's relationships that you build now that might pay off down the road, but to go on to your question earlier, is what does it look like early on in the process, like when you're open too? We get a lot of questions as well. I need to hire an office manager, an optician, and I also need to hire a receptionist. It's like, you're the office manager, you're the janitor, the head bottle washer, you do the exams, you're adjusting glasses, you're doing all those things. So if you want to open cold, it's something you're going to have to do all together. It's a pretty big responsibility. So
I think that's the most amazing part of the journey as well, both from a practice standpoint or a business standpoint. They share the same language, and it's the most amazing experience you could possibly go through. And that the hardship, the failures, being the janitor, and doing all those things are incredibly empowering. They're difficult, but I mean, you're going to wake up every morning charged, ready to go, and that's a really common sentiment, I think. Question: what does it cost? Give us a number. What are the numbers here? How much? And then, in a sense, too, when we hear those numbers, give us the reality behind them about how maybe they're not as bad as they may seem.
So typically, we've opened practices for under 200,000. On the high end, typically I would say a practice in a very affluential, high rent area, maybe closer to 285 or 300,000. The advantage is when you're working with lenders that understand optometry and understand the dynamics of a cold start, they have graduated payment scales. So for example, one of the programs that we like the best, you pay $100 for the first 3 months, you pay about $900 to $1,000 per month for the next 9 months. For the first year thereafter, you do interest-only payments, and then not until year 3 do you work into principal and interest payments together. Other programs have interest-only payments for 18 months, and then you transition over to principal and interest. So your payment is going to grow with your practice so that you're not getting socked with these high. So almost kind of think of it as income-based repayment the exact same way that your student loans are going to be, is that you're not going to be paying more until you're earning more.
Got it. Crazy numbers, not that bad. What do you guys think?
There again, it's a global number that you never really see again after you've worked through the process. And also keep in mind, let's just say a round number that you're doing $250,000, 40 to 50,000 of that's going to be working capital on the front end. So that's going to be cash that you start with. That's not going to be something that you've spent on at the online.
Student loan side. Does anything change with the student loans? Same type of payments? Do they look at it differently? Do they, can you lower your student loans because you're taking on this other loan? Everyone's got the student loan, so it's got to come into the picture. How does that work? Or is it just really the same coast along?
Most of our clients stay on their same payment schedule, and so that's all built in and factored into the debt load when the bank works out your repayment plan. So the credit department and underwriting looks at all those things. So we haven't had any issues with any of our clients, but I can tell you what really kills us is credit card debt. So some people take out extra student loans and then they start to take out this giant credit card debt. They do not like to see a high revolving credit line. They know you need student loan debt. That's debt you're expected to have, but
so it's an even playing field.
Absolutely.
Bob and I will take any question as an entry point to talk about credit scores and credit card debt, because it's an absolute non-starter. You go into these banks, you have credit scores in the 600s, low 700s, and that's the end of the discussion. They don't even get to the point of underwriting. So I can't stress enough, sign up for something like Credit Karma, get your free credit report each year, and understand where you're at now. And it'll actually teach you things that you can do, like having more available credit that position you better and get those scores higher that make you a favorable lender. And just jumping off real quick of what Bob said about the student loans, in many cases it's actually helpful when you cold start, because let's say you form what's called an S corporation. The business itself just runs through your personal tax returns. It'll actually, in the early years, because obviously you're not going to be making money hand over fist in year one, it'll actually lower your overall income on your tax returns, and you can actually decrease in some cases your student loan repayments. And of course, if they're ramping up, it's because you're making more money. So not a bad thing necessarily either.
So the average person, let's call it $100,000 in student debt by the time they're thinking of making this decision, maybe a little bit more. Practice is going to cost me $250,000, so $350,000. I'll take a $350,000 bet if I know I'm going to win, if I know I'm going to succeed. And so I know the banks think we're going to succeed because they say, yeah, we'll write the loan. We have pretty good numbers, and that's the data side of it. What about the emotional side of it? What can you tell us, the potential open colders? You're gonna win. It may take some time, but you're gonna win. How do we know that? Because I think anyone will make that bet, but how do we know?
I love the term, using it as a gambling analogy in Vegas. I mean, a bet on yourself is the best bet you can ever make. And student loan debt's an investment in yourself, and this practice is an investment in yourself. And if you believe in yourself, I mean, it's yours. These are your patients. This isn't somebody that you're working for. This isn't a corporation. These are yours. And the best example of that, I mean, it's so gratifying to know that, you know, patients bring their families in and they trust their other family and friends to refer them to you. And years down the road, I mean, you see their kids, or you end up realizing that in that 5 years of corporate job that you had, that you have to walk away from now, that you don't get to take any of the charts. You were making maybe $100,000 to $120,000 a year. Well, when you start cold and you're making maybe only 50 to 70 in the first year, and then you ramp up to 100 in the second and third, and more than that, and much more than 100 in year 5. Well, in year 5 now, you have this practice that is worth over $500,000. Well, most statistics and formulas that are used in practice evaluation tell us that it's worth about 60% of your gross. I mean, you now have this $300,000 investment in yourself that you can then sell to somebody else or take equity out and get other things for yourself and your family. I mean, it's a pretty cool thing to think that you built that rather than working for somebody else. So there's huge potential down the road, and you just have to be able to get through those first, you know, few moments. So.
You want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other element too is, you know, it's an emotional investment in yourself, of course, but I think it's also important to understand, we often hear so many things about the way the media kind of spins the state of optometry today as well. And, you know, one of the questions we always get is, well, do you think optometry is heading in a positive direction for me to be opening my own business and owning a practice? And the reality is, we're in a fantastic position right now. We just actually learned the other day that the percentage, what do you guys think the percentage is of people leaving a private practice and going to buy eyewear online is?
Shout them out.
25%. So it's 3.8%.
Yeah.
So, but on the flip side, they invest so much money in marketing that you would believe the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And the reality is, patients still want to buy eyewear from you. They still want to buy their contact lenses from you. You know, we're always teaching clients ways to stay competitive so that they can make up the difference on cost of goods and in margins as well, and still give the patients an affordable product for those that potentially don't want to spend more than what their insurance allots, for example. And so optometry is as strong as ever, and it's helpful for, I think, students to realize that, for new grads to understand that, because it can be daunting, because what we always see is what's on social media, what we always see is what's coming across the television, and we're thinking, well, the private practice that I've envisioned, this doesn't look like that. And the reality is, for those of us who are still in it, and those of us who are pushing it forward, it's as strong as ever.
Yep. Stories. Give us stories that have kind of that feel, so we can see that, hey, this is actually happening. You guys have done this before. And what does that look like, both in the short term or the long term? Anything you can deliver, you know, anonymous, but just what does it look like from their shoes?
I think some of our best stories are those that follow a path that exactly as I followed, where I worked in a practice as an associate. I went in under the typical guise of, I'm joining the practice, and in 3 years I'm going to buy this practice, and, you know, I felt as though that was going to be the case. And so 1 year went by, 2 years went by, and it came time for me to purchase, or buy in, if you will. And I had the practice appraised, you know, sat down, thought I was basically giving my best offer and that we were about to strike a deal, and came to realize that, you know, at that time the doctor really had no intention of selling, even though I felt, based on our previous conversations, that I was going to be buying the practice. And, you know, a good portion of our clients are in that exact same boat. They go through an attempted acquisition that either falls through or carries on forever, or has cost them a lot of money in the way of appraisals and attorney fees or consulting fees, and get to a point where a year, 2 years later, they're no further closer to a deal than they were in the first place. And it's so empowering for them to go out on their own in a much cleaner process, if you will, because you get to start exactly your way. You don't walk into a practice that's overstaffed. You don't walk into a practice that everyone's set in their ways and, you know, isn't looking for a newcomer to tell them how things are going to be. And you literally get to grow with your practice, as opposed to trying to work backwards and figure out all the ways that this practice is overspending and how you're going to get back to a controllable, you know, margin. And I think those are the best success stories that we see, because they come to us so dejected, almost even by the profession, because this is just how they envisioned it all along, and it didn't work out that way for them. And now they're in a scenario where they're working for themselves, they're doing it their way, they're able to predict their income, they're able to predict their trajectory and their growth, and they're happy. So those are the best stories for us, for sure.
I think my favorite, I just love meeting all the different people. I mean, we do everything. We're in small towns and farm towns, Chinatown, we're in huge cities, but one thing we pride ourselves on is we always go on location. So we love boots on the ground. We love to be around where the practice is going to open and getting to meet some of these people with this huge ambition. And we have one particular client that I love that brought her whole family into it, and they demoed the building together, and their kids are ripping boards out, and they're painting things together, and she's going and making the mayor cookies to make sure that the permit gets through on time. And they sponsor the fall festival, and they're doing things at church, and just local community building. I mean, this is a pillar of their community on literally Main Street in a one stoplight town, and it's just really cool to see people come from maybe a bigger city where they had to drive 2 hours to go to work, and now they're doing it for themselves in their own backyard where their family grew up and getting to serve all their friends and family. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, what's the difference between someone doing this on their own or working with iCare Advisors? How does that work? And why, I'm assuming you have a business side to this, but why does that make sense? Why does the decision to work with you guys make sense? And also, does that guarantee not guarantee, but does it likely relate to more success down the line?
So, I mean, I think the main thing that iCare Advisors has to offer is that we're a strategic guide from day one. I opened without a consultant, Bob opened without a consultant, and the thing that we've come to realize, and we say all the time, is you don't know what you don't know. And we didn't realize all of the things that we were missing out on because we just didn't have any resources to help us identify those things. And the other element is when you're cold starting, no matter where you're cold starting, no matter how successful you're positioned to be, you're gonna start small. You're not gonna have a ton of patients in the beginning, you're not gonna have a high volume day one. And so the goal is to maximize your profits off of those patients. And it's not by charging those patients more, it's by doing what you can on the lab side, doing what you can on the cost of goods, considering in-office finishing, all of these things that'll better position you to be profitable from day one on a smaller volume of patients so that you can just exponentially grow when that volume finally increases over time. And that's something that we guide from the very beginning. We help instill those values from the beginning so that you understand what the trajectory is going to look like, rather than kind of just getting a year in or 2 years in and saying, well, is this how it was supposed to be? Am I where I'm supposed to be? How do I compare to other practices? We help bring all that for you from the very beginning.
Yeah, we just save you a lot of money. I mean, we've made a lot of these mistakes early on, and we realized all the mistakes we made, and now we've scoured for every single best price and every single possible piece of equipment or lens that you could possibly get. So you're going to reap all the benefits of that, and plus, you don't pay up front for the fees. They're all financed into the loan, and banks love to see that you're working with somebody that is going to set you off on the right track. They know that your pro forma is valid because these people have done it before, and so they believe in you, and we have networks and all kinds of different vendors that we're able to provide you access for that you probably weren't going to be able to find on your own. Plus, we're up late at night. I mean, I answer text messages and phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning from the West Coast, and it drives my wife a little crazy, but we're there for you. So we understand we were in that panic mode, and sometimes you just need to take a deep breath and calm down. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Sure thing. Questions?
So the question was owning versus leasing, and the short answer is it depends on the location. So in certain areas, you may be looking at buildings that are under $100,000 or a couple $100,000, and in other areas you may be looking at buildings that are $1 million and up. And so that's kind of the first hurdle, is how much does the building cost? And then the financing typically tends to take a little bit different direction. Usually you'll either take out an SBA loan or a commercial loan for the property, and then you'll roll in a business loan underneath as well. So it's absolutely feasible. It just depends. They are going to dive a little bit deeper into your personal finances in that case. Student loans do come into play a little bit heavier in that scenario as well, just because you're increasing your overall debt to value at that point, and they want to make sure that everything's going to work. On the flip side, if you have the opportunity to purchase, it's fantastic because you can essentially set up two different companies. One company owns the building, the other company starts the practice, and the company that has started the practice can pay rent to your other company and cover your mortgage and then some. And typically you're probably gonna end up paying less than you would if you just rent it outright. And the beauty of it is, of course, as we talked about equity earlier, you build equity in the practice and you build equity in the building. So it's certainly an optimal setting when it's achievable.
Sloan.
One of the things that we're able to do is we have several different software programs that we use where we're actually able to determine, based on local demographics, how many optometrists should be within this certain area. But there's a lot of Big Brother information out there that you would never know exists. Every one of us carries a cell phone, and every one of us is being tracked. So we can tell you how much money people make that drive by your location. We can tell you usually what they do for a living and how many kids and what their race is. In some programs that are proprietary to certain optometric alliances, we'll tell you how much that particular county block has spent on eyewear and eye exams in the last year. So we can tell you exactly where you should open up. And that will kind of avoid us jumping into an area that's overly saturated. So we can kind of eliminate that on the front end rather than just throwing a dart and saying, I need to hang my shingle here.
Wow.
And the other component to that question is, would you just proceed anyways and open cold? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
We would never promote opening cold in a non-optimal location. We both practice in Chicago. I mean, Chicago's, we've heard for years and years and years that Chicago's saturated, yet we both open successful practices and we continue to open successful practices as well. That being said, there's plenty of areas in Chicago that cannot support another optometrist. So it's just really about being strategic. And it's not definitively linear to say your higher population, higher urban, higher concentrated areas are the most saturated. Not necessarily. It just depends on being strategic. Oftentimes trying to find that neighborhood that's right on the cusp of blooming and being one of the first in so that you can get a little bit more affordable rent, a better deal on your lease, and be best positioned to when that area explodes. Bob's practice is a perfect example of that. He was basically the first of the neighborhood, and he's in the heart of it now. And so a lot of it's about being strategic, and there and again, talking about what you mentioned earlier, Matt, there's always going to be an element of taking a chance. Our job is to eliminate the risk of that chance.
The other cool thing though is just us being involved with boots on the ground. I mean, we found great locations where we're like, this is absolutely perfect. We fly out there and we go visit the space and we're like, this is next to a hog farm. This smells terrible.
Yeah.
This is not going to be a good idea. We need to relocate. So sometimes it just takes, we have an expertise just kind of look around, and other times we've gotten to a space where it's been kind of a lukewarm location. We're like, there's a building boom right around here. This data is from really 2015. We need to look at 2016 data. This is going to explode. There's Range Rovers at this high school right here. You've got a Starbucks and a Walgreens that all opened up within the last 2 months, and that's not going to show in data that they've compiled over the last 12 months. Yep. So it really helps to kind of have boots on the ground to tell.
Yeah, really being in the field and watching it with their own eyes.
Yeah.
Sure. Other questions?
We open up next to corporate all the time. Corporate's not something that makes us nervous about a location. If corporate's in the location, it tells us that it's a good location because we know that they've done their due diligence, they've done their research on the space and location just like Starbucks has done, and we know that there's going to be a high patient demand. At the same time, I think there is a core patient base within corporate that potentially will never come to private practice optometry, and it's the type of patient that's looking for the absolute lowest cost. They're not looking to spend a penny beyond what their coverage is, and that's not often the type of patient you want to build your practice on anyways. You're hoping to recoup, and you're hoping to gain the type of patient that appreciates your value over what a corporate model has to offer, and then to take all of those patients that are kind of in the abyss that they're going to corporate due to a lack of another option, but would gladly come to your practice and have more of a hands-on experience and purchase your glasses from you. As you guys are seeing, we're at the Vision Expo. There's a million frame lines out there. So you could have your entire practice flush with frames, not a single one of which the corporate entity next door carries. And so frame lines are never an issue. You can always find your own unique niche and position yourself to succeed.
Yeah, sure thing. Other questions? It's a good question. How long have they stuck with you for?
Oh yeah, so in the beginning, it's kind of unlimited. So we've got some clients that we can open up in as quick as 3 to 4 months, and then we have a client that's on month 13. It kind of depends on their location analysis and how the financial aspect works. So in the beginning, it's unlimited. We also provide a lot of consultation to students at free of charge. Once we get you up and open, for the first 3 months, we're on board. Answer any questions that you may have. We have a couple of our staff members here with us today that do an excellent job of coordinating questions in regards to billing. We teach you how to bill and code, particularly higher end type of lenses or medically necessary contact lenses, in terms of frame line buying, things like that. So we're in for about 90 days. 90 days, you'll have a very good idea of what you need to do. and we're open for discussion after that. So,
and part of our angle with that is we want to make sure we're very selective when we work with clients to ensure that these clients are self-motivated and positioned for success. And so we don't want to have a false sense of security to say, we're going to be around for 2 years and run your practice for you. And I think it positions them in a far weaker position when, you know, the contract ends. Whereas if they understand that, hey, they have to buy in from the very beginning, they have to be ready to run on day one when the practice is open. Yep. We always stay around as a resource. I mean, that certainly never ends. We run into clients at, you know, shows and at meetings all the time, and we certainly answer any other questions that they may have, or if we've learned of other good resources that have come along from a vendor standpoint, they're the first ones we tell. But it's important that they understand this is not Eyecare Advisors practice. This is your practice. We're going to facilitate successful opening and profitability beyond, but ultimately you're the one that's going to carry the success of your practice.
Yeah. If someone wants to start thinking about doing this, obviously, and I think you guys would suggest, well, start with your own research. I mean, what are the top 3 things they can do to start building the business acumen? Because there'll be businessmen and women after this happens. There's no doubt about that. Should they look into the differences between corporate entities, financial statements, real estate? What are those top 3 things they should start to Google, start to look at before, to help solidify their knowledge?
So I don't think they even need to start looking at those things right off the bat. I think the main thing that they should focus on is, 1, where they want to practice, okay? That's the number 1 thing. Number 2 thing is, what is your mission statement? I mean, this is so important. Is, you know, are you going to be seeing pediatric patients? Are you going to be in a high-end area? Are you going to be in a suburban area with a lot of children, or in a geriatric community? What type of insurances do you want to take? Do you like to do medical care, or do you not? Would you rather focus on contact lenses? Those are the biggest decisions. You got to know what you're going to love to do for the next 30 years of your life. Sure. You know, we don't want to just go ahead and say, okay, here's all the information, go ahead and pick something. We like you to know that ahead of time. We can assist with all those business things. We're going to tell you what kind of corporation is set up depending on the state that you're in. We're going to help you develop your QuickBooks and develop a strong financial base that you can build off of. But you have to be happy in knowing what you're going to do, and that's the most important thing.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
there's
okay if you change your 3 a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think
I gave you 2.
Yeah, he's still missing one. The one he's missing is new grad optometry. You know, these are the types of resources that are available to you guys out there. There's a ton of articles, a lot of colleagues that we work with that are putting things on there that at least help you think about elements of cold starting, private practice, practice acquisition, corporate. You know, we'll be the first to tell you cold starting is not for everybody. Private practice isn't even for everybody. And I think the first decision that people need to make is they need to understand what's going to best suit their needs, their mission statement, their lifestyle, so that they're going to be happy in the profession of optometry. For those people who are still in school, they should be taking advantage of their private practice clubs. They should be getting in the doors of optometrists in the area, even if it's not where they're going to practice, to help understand different models that are set up, different ways that people are practicing, so that when it comes time to write that mission statement, they actually know what to put in it, other than just, I want to be an optometrist and I want to see a lot of patients. You want to have a focus, and that's going to help position you for success. And the best way to do that is to utilize all the free resources that you have while you're a student, when you're a new grad. There's plenty of them out there. You just have to take advantage.
Got it.
Here's a great example, though, of using new grad. I mean, Eric and I had a lecture a couple months ago, and sometimes, you know, people think they want to cold start in maybe a hometown that they grew up in, or a couple miles outside, and they don't know that there's a practitioner dying for them to sell their practice. And what we always encourage is people, especially while they're in school or just early out, sign up for Covalent Careers right now and connect with all the people that are on there. Yep. And that way you're able to network even before you graduate. You might find out that there's a 70-year-old optometrist that would love to have you come in and associate 3 days a week and possibly buy his practice, because he may be in a rural part that he didn't think he'd even have an option. So we always encourage people to make those connections early on, and then meet up with meetings like this at the bar or wherever they happen to come to kind of network. So,
yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who don't know, covalentcareers.com is an online platform to help employers and job seekers meet around a common opportunity. It's a great way to network even as a student. Questions? Go ahead.
our compensation works as a global fee that's part of the financing. So as Bob mentioned earlier, the banks like to see that you're working with someone like us because they know that you're going to be better positioned for success, and that gets rolled into the loan itself. So just as you'll have an equipment budget, you'll have a leasehold improvements budget, you'll have a consulting budget. So it's not something that you have to have had money saved up for on the front end. It's not something that you have to spend out of that associating income or that supplemental income that you have. It just becomes a part of the 10-year loan or the 12-year loan, whatever you're able to achieve. As far as, you want to answer the other part of the question? Or?
I think she wanted to know how much we charge people.
What's that?
I think she wanted to know how much we charge people.
Oh, so we do a flat fee of $19,000, and you do a down payment on the front end that's reimbursable by the banks as well, and then they finance the rest once you start cutting checks to contractors or any of the other professionals that you're spending on as you go along.
And I think when thinking about that in terms of that fee, or the way to really think about a lot of business decisions is, what is the opportunity cost? If you didn't go that route, what is the cost of maybe getting it wrong or not doing it as efficiently or making mistakes? Sure, you're not shelling out that money, but you may be missing earlier revenue potential, and that exponential growth of a practice, you want to get to that inflection point as soon as possible, and that leads to capitalized and better returns in the long run. So always think about opportunity cost is really, really important.
And to answer the second part of the question, I mean, I think, part of what's working with us too, we're both optometrists, we both have been through it before. We do a lot of hand-holding and real personal service, kind of throughout the whole process. And in terms of marketing, I think, one of the biggest things people need to do, especially if they open up, near their home, is, they're going to need to send out, obviously, letters to friends and family members to let them know that they arrived. But one of the things we've learned is that a lot of people, especially maybe older generations, they don't know what optometrists really do now. I mean, when I graduated, I didn't have the ability to write oral prescription drugs, okay? I still go around and you have to visit local pediatricians. You have to visit local endocrinologists and just primary care physicians and let them know that you do treat diabetes. You don't have to refer them to the ophthalmologist in the hospital. You're able to send them back. You don't treat diabetes, you diagnose that in the eye. And you're able to send that letter back to them and let them know that you will keep their HEDA scores, up. That you also see emergency patients, that you're able to see red eyes, you're able to see children, you're able to test to see if they have viral conjunctivitis or not. And we've been able to really build practices from the get-go by letting people know exactly what optometrists do. They don't initially think, oh, I need to send them down to the local corporate chain because this patient has diabetes or they might need emergency care. So we do a lot of that. We also use a lot of the information from that analysis to be able to tell us where to market and what that marketing looks like, what the picture of the family should look like on the card, how we should be targeting them. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into the marketing aspect, and not only that, but with online he's the master of that. But I mean, you look at Yelp and is a monster. You look at Google, and we need to get the website up to date and make sure all those keywords are perfect and make sure you have a great online presence and your website's perfect from day one. So we kind of have a hand in all that, kind of directing you depending on where you're located. We have clients that sometimes there's not going to be a single person in a 1 mile radius that may visit their website. But you know what? They walk to the grocery store every day because they live in Chinatown and they cook every day. So you know what? Tote bags may be the best thing for them because that's where they put all the produce in, and we'll get them some tote bags, make sure that everyone in the area knows they're there. So it's another boots on the ground kind of thing that may not work in downtown Chicago, but it works in Chinatown.
Yeah. I mean, for marketing and things like that, you want to plug yourself into everything that's free out there. There's all sorts of different marketing, but it comes back to your mission statement and understanding that's your core. Then it's about telling your story, and your story can be told through a lot of different mediums, through social media, through your own blog, through direct marketing or mailers or things like that, through getting involved in the community. But marketing should always be authentic, and when I was seeing patients all the time, the biggest marketing thing for me was at the end of the day, I'd write every single patient a personal email. Every single person. It would have a little bit of a templated line that you store in a signature, you just load up the signature, and then everyone gets something custom. And that by far was the biggest marketing vehicle, and it worked well in our demographic, and it worked well for our population. But marketing is something that you don't just set it and forget it. It's a long roller coaster of ups and downs, and you'll find out how to find your little niche. But that's the exciting part. That's the part that's always changing and will always change, and the old ways go out and new ways come in.
That's a great point, and I'm even more old school. I like getting handwritten things in the mail.
Sure.
So every new patient, handwritten letter, you put a card in there letting them know, thank you so much for coming in. If there's anything else we could do to your friends and family, here's a $25 gift card. Please feel free to give it to them. You write their name on the back, and you credit their account when they come in. And it's just a cool little touch, and it only takes a couple seconds, but very valuable.
And that's the key, I think, too. A lot of people are not going to be doing this stuff. It's a lot easier to stand out and succeed than I think you may think it is. And I think that comes down into your core. What do you really want your life to be like? What is your real end goal? You know, you can lower those student loan payments and start bringing this side of things up. What do you want? What's your real core end goal? Do you know you're going to succeed? Do you really, really believe that? And if so, nothing will get in your way and you'll achieve that goal. It's really important to start with the mindset. It sounds mushy, but it's very true. We could do a couple tangible things like what's a cash flow statement? What's a balance sheet? And what's a profit and loss statement?
So profit and loss statement is probably the one that you're going to utilize the most, especially once you're open. And that basically outlays your expenses, your income on the top line, your cost of goods sold, your expenses, any owner draws or anything that you're taking out of there as well is going to show up in your profit and loss statement. Typically you're going to utilize that to track your budget over time. The cash flow statement basically talks about cash on hand at any given time. So it aggregates every kind of the end number of your profit and loss statement. So either a positive or a negative number on the top end, and then it's going to compare that against what you did the month before or the quarter before, depending on how you're comparing. And you can see if you have, more cash on hand or less cash on hand, which way you're trending.
Helps you to project as well, to say how much cash am I going to have before I may run out of cash.
Correct. And we always like, there's 1,000,001 different equations that can be used within the world of optometry and consulting. We like cash-based analysis. We like the approach of an accountant because an accountant's going to tell you how much cash you have, how much cash you hope to have, and how you're going to get from point A to point B. A balance sheet has your assets and your liabilities as well, so that's where your equipment's going to go. That's where your long-term liabilities and your loans, your vehicles, if they're involved, are going to be, and they kind of give the global snapshot of the practice at any given time. So it's important in the beginning to be involved. We like clients to do their own. QuickBooks, for example, is one that we often use, and I think it just gives you an immediate vested interest in what's happening with your practice. Admittedly, in the beginning, you're going to be doing your QuickBooks day by day and comparing all the time and driving yourself absolutely crazy. Eventually, as the practice begins to grow, you learn to compare more month over month and quarter over quarter. We're in a profession that's not always predictable. Sometimes May will be your worst month of the year, and the following year may be the best month of the year. So you don't want to get too hung up on the day-to-day or month-to-month elements. You want to look more at your quarter-to-quarter trends.
Yep.
You also have to remember too that we live in a day and age of electronic medical records now, and a lot of this software is contained in a lot of these things. It's not simply a $10,000 cash register that you put money into. You can actually utilize those metrics and track those specific metrics. And all of these different EHRs out there right now do a very good job of tracking that, as long as you're utilizing the information properly. When I started, we had to do it by hand with a chart and but now things are much, much different. It
He's quite a bit older than I am. I never did it that way.
Yeah.
Questions on those financial statements? They'll be your best friend and they'll keep you up at night. Yep.
Okay. Yes.
Anything from carpeting to wallpaper.
Yeah. So what we've learned is, we like to start a lot of times from the top down. What is your dream? When you meet with our designer, they want to know what is your vision for the practice, and then we can kind of scale things back from there to find out what's the most important thing for you. It kind of varies from client to client. Our equipment is pretty standardized in terms of the core equipment that you need to be able to legally practice in a certain state. So those numbers are all pretty rigid, outside of usually one or two specialty things. We love to start with an in-office finishing system. It's incredibly profitable to be able to offer that patient very rapid service and at a very significant savings to the practice. So that's when we like to work into the budget early. In terms of other necessary things, we don't have to have elaborate optical design displays that cost tens of thousands of dollars. We can do it very simply and very clean now by using very simple lines and shelving units displayed in a very clean, temples out kind of a fashion. So we're able to save a lot of money there. We don't believe in spending a lot on the dispensary. The furniture, a lot of times we piece some of that stuff together from different sources, even trying to use local small businesses to kind of shop them and support them locally and use those pieces in your office. In terms of decor and flooring and carpeting, we like to use some of those elements, but if we can carpet to dampen sound in some areas to save money, we will. If we can utilize an open ceiling concept that's more modern, we will, so we don't have to drop grid ceiling down. But in terms of essentials, it kind of varies from project to project.
What about stuff like EHR system, or what equipment is essential?
EHR is an absolute must to start out with. To run a high-end practice, especially with all of our clients are very young, you want to keep that image of being cutting edge and being technologically savvy. So we have everything on the cloud. We like to offer all of the clients, their new patients, access to them even 24 hours a day, so that if they have a question about the chart, you can pull it up on your phone or at home. So we like very cloud-based type systems, including electronic charts. I don't want a projector chart that you have to change the bulb. And we want everything very high-end, and the cost has come down quite a bit.
Yep.
And the key is too, starting lean does not mean starting cheap. And it's important to understand oftentimes when we talk about trying to start as lean as we can, that doesn't mean you're opening a practice that doesn't attract a high-end clientele. It simply means not overspending on elements that don't yield an increase in revenue. So a second exam room, for example. Certainly we'll build out a second exam room. You'll have your plumbing, you'll have the room, but you're not going to put equipment in there to collect dust over the first few months or years, whatever it may be, depending on what your trajectory of growth is. Those are areas where you can save money. We mentioned an OCT earlier. That's something that's not going to yield enough revenue to support itself in the beginning of a cold start practice. And whether it's sitting in the office or isn't going to change the value of a patient that comes into the practice as well. So it's building a practice that you can expand upon. You can add more of the high-end luxury things as you go. It's not building a cheap practice and then redoing it over X number of years later. It's putting yourself in a position to build later down the road.
Questions on that stuff? LLC, C Corp, S Corp, what do you pick? Does it matter?
It definitely matters, but it's also very state dependent as well. Traditionally, most cold start private practice optometrists are going to do an LLC. They'll file as an S Corp if they have that election in their state. Some states you can actually just form an S Corp right out of the gates. The main differences and nuances between each typically tend to be how they affect and run through your personal insurance, personal taxation rather. The goal, of course, is to not be double taxed. You don't want to be taxed on your income and be taxed as a business separately. Some states have replacement taxes where you pay a small percentage of your gross income automatically to the state, no matter what type of entity you have set up, and then you run the rest of it through your personal income taxes. It would also behoove you to look into how it's going to affect your student loans so that you understand it, so that you're not paying a maximum amount on your student loans because your loss that you're able to demonstrate in year one doesn't reflect on your personal tax statements, and you're paying basically a higher amount than you should be, and you're losing on the other end. So it's a matter of being strategic. It's a matter of working with your CPA as well to best position yourself so that you have the most beneficial entity.
What other topics are really important in this microcosm of optometry?
Contracts.
Yeah, I was just going to say, contracts, partnerships, these are things that come up often as well. Partnerships, things to take into consideration when forming a partnership is, first and foremost, it's absolutely a marriage. It's a financial marriage. It's something where your entrance strategy is just as important as your exit strategy. You always have to keep in mind that it can and may end at some point, and you don't want to go in with the thought that it's going to last forever, because you may either be different ages, you may have different goals when all is said and done, and even though you may share a initial shared mission statement, the end game is not always the same. So you need to make sure that you have a strong operating agreement, even if you're husband and wife, even if you're best friends or just colleagues. Have a good operating agreement that spells out all of the what ifs down the road to make sure that you're protected for it. In terms of financing, the main things to keep in mind is it can be very beneficial because you have a dual supplemental income to show against your net worth when all is said and done. At the same time, depending on what your student loans are, you're doubling down on that as well. So you can be taking a $200,000 student loan debt, and now it's a $400,000 student loan debt as well. So you just need to be cognizant of the fact that there are pluses and minuses to it, and it may seem easier to have a buddy in the trenches with you in the beginning, but you need to make sure that you understand all of the ramifications of a partnership, and also understand in a cold start element, you're typically not going to be there together. One of you will be there while the other person's working in an associating job, and vice versa. It may be 2, 3, 5 years before you both are there seeing patients, simultaneously at the same time. And so sometimes we see friends that just want to go in together thinking, well, we like hanging out, we like having beers, let's practice optometry, and they're never there together. And then come all the nuances of who's doing the administrative duties, who's handling the HR. We have an issue with an employee. Are you going to handle it, or am I going to wait until it's your day and you're going to handle it? And so it's just something to make sure that you fully understand. By all means, partnerships can be wildly successful, but they can also have their hiccups, very early on.
What's also important, Matt, though, is where you work now, and what does your contract look like now? Did you sign a non-compete clause that prohibits you from opening cold within 15 miles of, an area that's completely saturated? You have to be careful what you're going to sign right now and have an attorney review that. I mean, non-compete clauses are very difficult to enforce, but they can cost a ton of money in legal fees. So be always very careful what you sign now, get some great legal advice, and it's different from city to small town. A 15-mile non-compete in a small town might as well be a 2-mile, because you can move 20 miles out and people will come see you. But in downtown Chicago, if you have a 15-mile non-compete, you might as well move to a different state. Right. So always get great legal advice whenever you're signing contracts now, even if you think you might want to open up a practice a couple years in the future.
And never sign a lease without having someone review it. We unfortunately have people that come to us after they've already signed a very poor lease, and that's probably the number one commitment of all in the entire process, because you could already be dictating the terms for a period of 20 years in that lease that you sign, and you need to make sure that it's beneficial for you and that the onus is on you in order to be able to extend that lease, and that it's not the landlord that has full control. So whether it's someone like us, whether it's an attorney, whether it's another consultant, sometimes just having the real estate broker say, hey, this is a good lease, is not enough, because you have to keep in mind, they're incentivized to get the lease signed. Typically, they don't get reimbursed until a lease is signed, and so they may not, oftentimes I don't think it's intentional. It's not that they don't have your best interest, in mind. They just may know nothing about optometry, and they may not understand, the idiosyncrasies of our profession and how it's going to affect you 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road. So Absolutely. Don't make a decision like that you can't get out of.
Yep. How many of you guys are thinking of opening cold, or even a slight potential? Show of hands. A couple of you guys. How do we get in touch with you? What's the best way? Careful, it's going to go on YouTube. We've had people just give out their cell phone numbers, and they're like, can you edit that?
We can give Bob's. We can give Bob's.
My cell phone number is out there anyway, but we give them to everybody.
iCare Advisors LLC.com. We have cards. We can certainly talk with you guys after this, give you any contact information that you're interested in. But certainly, as Bob mentioned earlier, we love to communicate by phone, text, email. We're always available, always willing to ask questions, always willing to have as many conversations as you need to on the front end to make sure that this process is truly something for you before we proceed. It doesn't benefit either one of us for you to decide that cold starting is not for you after a period of time. We want to make sure that you're well positioned from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we work with a lot of different folks in the industry, and Eric and Bob and iCare Advisors as a company is really tremendous, and for what they do and their ability to stay involved from you're looking at it right here is incredible. I don't know how much longer it'll last, because they're super busy, and what they have is certainly growing because it's special. And so absolutely talk to them, even if you have only the slightest desire to potentially go that route. But yeah, thank you guys for doing this. Hey, incredible advice.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for having us, man, as always.
Cool. All right. And we'll stick around if you guys want to chat.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.